Chifley.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. This year's budget did absolutely nothing to address the fundamental unfairness of last year's budget disaster, which locked in $30 billion of savage cuts to education. These brutal cuts will affect every student passing through Chifley classrooms, and because of this government's budget, New South Wales will be hit with over $9.5 billion in school cuts over the next 10 years, $3.1 billion coming from Western Sydney alone. 68 schools in the electorate of Chifley will have to deal with a $270 million cut over the next 10 years. The electorate with the second biggest cut in New South Wales, and these cuts will have a real impact on student outcomes and teacher resources. The $30 billion in cuts are the equivalent of an average cut of $3.2 million per school. And it's the same as sacking 1 in 7 teachers. And at a time when Western Sydney is growing, these cuts are dangerous and short-sighted. They'll mean less of the individual support that can be provided to students. It'll mean less in terms of essential literacy and numeracy support, with programs being cut, less training and support for teachers. And the Australian Early Development Index shows just how these cuts will hurt the students who will need the most help. For example, in the area of Blacktown, 23.8% of children are classified as vulnerable in at least one part of their development. But at a time when we should be closing that inequity gap, these children have been dealt a cruel blow from these cuts. Our students certainly deserve better than these cuts to the education budget, and even the government's Liberal national counterparts in New South Wales are joining into the fight on this. Less than 3 weeks ago, the Minister for Education in New South Wales, Adrian Pickley, said that the New South Wales government will continue to advocate for the federal government to honour the agreement in full. Said that 28 May. The Minister certainly owes Western Sydney answers about these cuts, and I would ask a series of questions. Principally, what does he say to the disadvantaged children in Western Sydney who are hoping to change their lives through education but have been impacted upon by these cuts? What does he say to the parents in Mount Druitt who want the best for their children's education but have seen all from this government, all they've seen are broken promises? What does he say to the hard-working principals who just want the resources they need so that children can thrive in their classrooms? And will he ever come to his senses and scrap his unfair budget measures, which will hurt our children and their future? When will he drop those cuts and stop punishing the children of Western Sydney?
I thank the member, and I call the Minister for Education.
Mr Deputy Speaker, the member for, what's your seat called again? Chifley. The member for Chifley would be well advised to do his homework, Madam Speaker, and Mr Deputy Speaker, because the reality is there are no reductions in education spending in schools in this budget or last year's budget or any other budget into the future brought down by this government. School funding goes up every year on year for the next 4 years. 8%, 8%, 6% and 4%. Now, I know it's very hard for Labor. Labor has not done the work in opposition to recalibrate their policy positions. It's sad that they're still just talking about the last election. They're still talking last night on the killing season. They're constantly, like a narcissistic obsessive disorder, they are constantly talking about themselves, and they're still talking about last election and policies from last election. But the news for the member for Chifley, and he is a much better member for Western Sydney, the member for Lindsay is a much better Western Sydney member, and the people who live in Mount Druitt probably much prefer to be represented by the member for Lindsay than the member for Chifley. But Mr Deputy Speaker, I digress. The truth is, Mr Deputy Speaker, there is a massive increase in spending on school education, and Labor knows it. What the member for Chifley has not caught up with is that his party has not committed to the extra money in years 5 and 6 beyond the forward estimates and beyond the current school agreement. They've not committed to it. Bill Shorten hasn't committed to it. Chris Bowen hasn't committed to it. Kate Ellis hasn't committed to it. Mark Butler hasn't committed to it. And I would recommend to him, I'd recommend to the member for Chifley that he goes back and looks at Mark Butler's comments last week or the week before in The Australian, where the Labor states and territories and the Australian Education Union asked federal Labor whether they were committed to the billions of dollars of extra spending that they haven't got the money for, and Mr Butler obfuscated and did not answer the question. Exactly the same what Mr Shorten did on the Neil Mitchell program. Chris Bowen has done the same thing, because Labor knows they don't have the money. Labor knows that they've already got $58 billion black hole in their economic credibility going forward. They know that. They're going to bring apparently $15 billion of extra spending on foreign aid back if they get re-elected. They've apparently got rivers of gold to knock off our savings measures, to vote against their own savings measures in the budget from when they were in government. They think that there is somehow a magic pudding of money out there, Mr Deputy Speaker, but the Australian public are much wiser than that. But let me tell the member for Chifley exactly what is happening. There is $69.5 billion over the forward estimates of funding to schools. $69.5 billion. It is a growth of 27.9%. 27.9% on the 2014-15 baseline. Now, a growth of 27.9% is not a cut. It's not a reduction. It means an increase in spending. It means an increase in spending. It means an increase in spending, no matter how much the member for Chifley interjects. A 27.9% increase means there's more money for schools in the budget this year and next year and the year after than there was in the previous years. And so that's why schools are focusing, as is the government, on the other elements that make a quality education, whether it's school autonomy, which New South Wales has definitely signed up to, just like Western Australia and Queensland and all the other states and territories have signed up to it. It's why they support our reforms to teacher training at university, because the OECD says the most important element in Australia about whether a child gets a good outcome is the quality of teaching. Now, the member for Chifley should stop following the line of the AEU and actually start listening to what parents say. What parents want is quality teaching in their schools. They want a robust curriculum. They want to be engaged in their schools, and they want their principals and their leadership teams to make as many decisions locally as possible, and that is what we are delivering. We've decluttered the primary school curriculum. We've refocused the curriculum on science and maths and English. We've refocused, well, we have actually, you haven't caught up with it. ACARA is working on it now to start on the 1st of January 2016. There'll be a new national curriculum on the 1st of January 2016, initiated by this government, agreed to by every state and territory. And we've also reformed teacher training, have a parental engagement program and independent public schools across Australia.
I think the Minister